This is the progressive unit. This is part 2 of the progressive notes, beliefs and prohibition. We are taking Cornell notes, so please make sure to put your main questions and big ideas on the left side of the notes, and then we will be creating a one-sentence summary at the end of our notes. Let's get started. The warm-up question that we had today was, what is the biggest problem in America? And that was a question that many of the progressives asked. They were constantly asking themselves, what were the problems in society and what are the solutions? Then I also asked, if you could change anything about CHS, your school, what would it be? And so making it more personal, going from the national to the local level. And then I asked my students, based on question 2, would it be better for administration to make that change or for you? And this notes that progressives answered these type of questions in 2 ways. One, some progressives sought to change society while employing the government regulation, and government intervention. But then other progressives sought to directly get involved and to be the change that they wanted to see, if you will. And so those 2 types of progressives, we'll see that in these notes. The first part of progressives are those who want to use the government. The populists, they were the first progressive third political party. As you know, we have 2 major political parties in the United States of America. We have the Republicans and the Democrats. However, what you may not know is that there are other political parties that you can vote for and candidates that you can vote for in the major elections. You have the Peace and Freedom Party, you have the Green Party, you have the other such parties like Libertarian and such. And so you can note that there are many different third parties. And so the populists were kind of that third big political party in America. You don't need to write this down, but William Jennings Bryan was that main political figure that was running for office for the presidency, and he almost won the presidency. He was that popular. Now, these populists, breaking down the term, means people, or the People's Party. And so this was a union of farmers and workers. They mainly fought railroad monopolists because these small farmers, they wanted to ship their products nationally and grow their farms even bigger. And so they oftentimes fought these railroad monopolists that were trying to monopolize the railroads and only ship from industries that they had kickbacks from. And so these poor farmers are trying to get the government to regulate and to socialize the railroads, if you will. And so the Populist Party ended up failing, but the Democratic Party absorbed much of their supporters, which made the Democratic Party more liberal. The Democratic Party was founded by Thomas Jefferson, a slave owner, to kind of be the People's Party, if you will, versus the Federalist Party, which is more of the strength of the nation. But the People's Party, the Democratic Party, started being more slave owning and such. The KKK even came out of the Democratic Party. So this is where the Democratic Party starts to become more populist and back to their roots. But then Eugene V. Debs founded the Socialist Party of America in 1901. However, most progressives believe the socialist ideas were too drastic. Just like Bernie Sanders being a socialist in the Democratic Party, most Democrats will not vote for Bernie Sanders because they see his policies as a little bit too extreme. That was the same thing with Eugene V. Debs. He founded the Socialist Party. However, it didn't really gain too much traction. He did get 1 million votes nationally for the presidency in the following election in 1912, I believe it was. However, most progressives, they thought that he was too drastic, because that socialism, if you remember, is that extreme government control of major industries. It's not as extreme as communism, which means no private property at all, government owns and controls everything, but socialism is still that government control of major industries. And while some progressives would want the government to solve their problems, most were not as extreme as the socialists to fix those problems. But then you have the Christian-minded individuals. Unlike those who wanted the government to fix society, the Christian-minded individuals wanted themselves to fix society. And so we have an individual such as Charles Monroe Sheldon, who wrote a book called In His Steps. And this book was a bestseller during his time, and it challenged Christians to ask themselves in every situation, what would Jesus do? And if you've seen the wristbands, WWJD, that's where those wristbands come from. It comes from this book and his question, what would Jesus do in solving the problems of the present political, economic, and social life? And so this book really started to inspire people to have heart change, not just political change and change through laws, but to actually change the way that they thought. Now, we have to be careful with this because we want to differentiate the difference between justification and sanctification. Justification is the work of Christ on the cross to save one's soul, to make one born again. But then you have the sanctification, which asks, what would Jesus do? So since you have been saved by faith, how can you act out that faith in a sanctifying process, if you will? So that was his question there. I like this quote right here by Theodore Roosevelt, president during the Progressive Era. Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And that reminds me of this man, D.L. Moody. D.L. Moody was the founder of the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. He published books for the poor and prisoners. And this reminds me of that Theodore Roosevelt quote because D.L. Moody was somebody who didn't just preach the gospel, but he also showed that he cared for the least of society, those poor and those forgotten in prisons. He didn't just train people in the Bible, teaching their soul, but he also taught them practically. And so he gave education and practical instruction. So he really influenced the whole person there. He's famous for saying, let go and let God. So let go of all your expectations, let go of trying so hard, and let God, trust God. Trade your trying for trusting, as I always say. He also was famous for using the wordless book. The wordless book was designed by Charles Spurgeon with 3 colors. However, he would use the wordless book with so many more colors, the gold color representing heaven, but then the dark color representing sin, the bad news that we are all sinners. But then the good news, the red color, that is Christ's blood, saving us from our sins. And then the clean color being the cleaning our hearts, making our hearts white as snow. And then the green color, growing in Christ. And then the blue color being baptism. And so D.L. Moody, he was that one who was very involved in not just the biblical training, but also practical instruction. Question time. Is the doctrine or the experience of Christianity of more importance? Or put another way, is the crucifixion of Christ and resurrection really of that much importance if someone is simply living a Christian life? And so my next topic here will focus on the crucifixion, the importance of that event versus just merely living a progressive Christian life. And so J. Gershom Meacham, he taught that the event, the facts, and the doctrine of Christ are essential, whereas modern theology was a little bit more progressive at this time, was teaching that Christianity was more of an experience. And though the experience of Christ is important, the experience of being born again and being filled with the Spirit is important, without the fact of the event of the crucifixion and the resurrection, without the doctrine, Christianity can become more progressive, that it focuses just on what we do instead of what was done. And so J. Gershom Machen really was an important individual that reminded us of that. He believed that the moral law, the Bible, you don't have to write this down, is true from the past and for the future. Freud and Karl Marx had taught that science would disprove a need for religion, but J. Gershom Machen, he really contradicts that and says, no, there is a need for religion, and that it's not just religion, but that it's the actual event and of Christ that is of importance, not just the experience of religion and such. Then I asked my students, Prop 13 in 2012, California legalized marijuana. What were the arguments for legalizing marijuana, and what were the arguments against legalizing marijuana? The reason I asked this question is because we would get to the prohibition movement that saw many of the same arguments for and against it. So let's look at prohibition next. Prohibition is the ban on this production, sale, and consumption of liquor. So it didn't just make alcohol and liquor illegal to drink, but it also made it illegal to manufacture and to sell it. The reason that the progressives sought to get rid of alcohol is because they saw liquor and alcohol as the cause of crime, poverty, and family violence. And as we've looked at before with the temperance movement of the late 1800s, this is the same continuous movement that sees the problems in society of crime, poverty, and family violence as originating from alcohol. But as we know, we need to make sure that we differentiate between symptoms and problems. Just like a headache, the headache is not the problem, that's the symptom. Dehydration, stress, lack of sleep, weather, those could all be the problem that is causing a headache. And so it would be so easy just to take medicine to get rid of the headache instead of addressing the problem. So prohibition does not deal with the problem, just the symptom. The 18th Amendment was passed, which was a constitutional amendment to prohibit alcohol. So for 14 years, the manufacturing and the sale of alcohol in the United States was prohibited. It took the House, the Senate, the President to enact this law, but then it also went to 3/4 of the states to approve this 18th Amendment. And so it was actually added to the Constitution, and it wouldn't be until the House, Senate, President, and the states 14 later would reverse this 18th Amendment with the 21st Amendment. And so this is the only amendment that's ever been passed and then repealed in our Constitution. However, there were unintended consequences which caused it to be repealed and removed. The resistance to the 18th Amendment were things such as moonshiners, people who began making their own alcohol, which is called moonshine. You also had speakeasies where people would drink in secret, in gambling and involved with that secret drinking. And then also the mafia, the mob, started having a violent control of alcohol. And so this is an example of unintended consequences. Although it sounds really good to get rid of alcohol, although it sounds really good to get rid of marijuana, you got to look at the unintended consequences, which is that black market. Now, I'm not saying that we should legalize marijuana. I think that it was much better when marijuana was illegal. However, there were so many problems with it that they needed to be addressed. And addressing problems does not mean that there's only one solution, which means to legalize. There could be other solutions. But with alcohol, the continual drinking of alcohol was a problem. Now, some research has shown that drinking did go down by 11%, but you would think that drinking would go down quite a lot more if it was made illegal. So instead, people oftentimes just made their own alcohol, which was very dangerous. It was not regulated alcohol anymore, but alcohol that was just created in people's bathtubs or out in the backwoods in the light of the moon, which is why it's called moonshine, or the speakeasies, the secret gambling and drinking, or the mob controlling that black market there. And so it created a lot of unintended consequences there. So as we saw with our notes, I want you to review the big ideas on the left-hand margin of your notes and then create a one-sentence summary. Noticing that we, in the progressive unit as Americans, there were two different ways to address things, whether it was through the government mandating things, prohibiting things, or whether it was through personal heart change through the gospel. And every situation is different, whether it's the government that should change things or whether it's you, whether it's our school administration or whether it's you personally as a student should change. But it depends on the situation. However, most change is often best when it is done through the heart and not just through anything else. So thank you for taking these notes.